So this is a pretty good indication of what you're going to see on the written section of your test. Not question 0. Question 0 hopefully is kind of free marks. All vectors have both magnitude and direction. There's a good chance on the multiple choice section, there's going to be about 4 or 5 multiple choice questions, and then there's going to be a using principles of physics right to explain question, and I'll give you some hints about that, relax. And then there's going to be 4 written questions. So on the written section, there's a good chance on the multiple choice section I'll ask you some conceptual stuff. What do I mean by conceptual stuff? You absolutely need to know what's AX, what's the horizontal acceleration?
0.
What's the vertical acceleration? Okay. What about velocities? Which velocity changes, horizontal or vertical? Okay. Which velocity is constant, horizontal or vertical? Those would be good conceptual kind of multiple choicey questions I could throw at you. There is going to be one fairly nasty multiple choice question. It's going to involve, here's your hint, finding a slanty velocity. Okay, we did a couple like that. Madison's giving me the stink eye. I get it. It won't be too bad, though. I'll give you enough numbers in the question that you should be, I think, okay. You'll be all right. Definitely going to be on the written section horizontally from a cliff. I chose to dulp before I did anything else. I needed to visualize what was going on. So I said, okay, horizontally means that Vx is 80. And I made my little T-table over here. I wrote down my 2 physics no-brainers. Vx is 80. What's Vy initial horizontally from a cliff? This you have to remember, but this is why horizontally from a cliff is the easiest of all the projectile questions. Yeah. Yeah. For a split second, right when it leaves, it hasn't started following yet. That 0 makes things much nicer. Anytime there's a 0, stuff cancels and whatnot. What else have they told me? They gave me the cliff is 25 meters high. So I can say that the vertical displacement is 25. Is that correct? Negative. If this was multiple choice, would I have one answer if you forgot to put the negative in? Yeah, I would. Probably would do that. Okay. They want me to find how long it's in the air. You know what? They want me to find time. I need 3 things to find the 4th. Here's the column where I know 3 things. Now, also, as far as I'm concerned, Lily, I would have no problem, instead of giving you the vertical displacement, the cliff height, I could give you the range. That also makes it easier because A is 0. You get a lovely, you're still going to use D equals VI plus a half AT squared, but the quadratic term cancels. Very easy to find time and then do something with it as well. Find the height or whatever. Here, it's going to be D equals a half AT squared. What happened to the VIT? VI is 0 vertically, and I'm solving this vertically. This is nice because although this is a quadratic, and you could use the quadratic formula, since there's only one t, I can get the t by itself. I'm going to get that t equals 2 times dy divided by ay square root. I'm going to get that t equals the square root of 2, negative 25, negative 9.8. 2 times negative 25 divided by negative 9.8. Square root answer button. And I get 2.25. I'm going to write 2.26. But I'm going to keep this on my calculator, or I'll jot down maybe to 5 sig figs somewhere in the margin if I need to use it. And that's seconds. If you got that, 2 out of 2. Otherwise, I would give you a half mark if I saw that you had realized that Vy initial was 0. I would give you a half mark if I saw that. I would give you a half mark for that. And a half mark for the answer. But if you got that answer in any method, you get 2 out of 2 first, then I go hunting for the half marks if you don't get it right. So show your work on quizzes and tests whenever possible. That way, even if you make a typo, I can still give you most of the marks. B, how far does the cannon travel horizontally? B wants me to find the range. The range is going to be VXT plus a half AXT squared. Except what's AX as a number exactly, Keegan? So this whole term vanishes. So it's just going to be Vx, which in this case was 80 times my answer. I'm going to write 2.26, but I'm going to use my answer button. And I get a range of 181. If you got that, 2 out of 2. Now, if you got your answer from A wrong, but for part B you went 80 times your answer from A, I would give you 2 out of 2 for part B. Otherwise, if you got this wrong, I would give you 1 mark if I saw that, a half mark for that, and a half mark for the answer. Now, you haven't had a test from me yet, but I think I mentioned to you, most of your written questions will be worth 7 marks because that's what it was done on the old provincial. And what that means, Madison, is show work, don't leave stuff blank. I give out part marks like candy. The only time I'll really get annoyed is if a kid turns in a written question completely blank. Because I've tried to give you starting points and what I've called no-brainers or whatever. Anything you can write down is worth doing. Number 2, we have a projectile launched at an angle. Did I say angle? They want the vertical and horizontal components. So I did a quick DALP. I said, okay, 28 meters per second. And 58 degrees. This is Vx. This is Vy. I'll put an initial there to remind myself that that's the one that's changing. Color, 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 color. Opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. You can walk through all the trig, but, oh, I gave you a stupid hook. What was Vy? Oh, so you're telling me Vy is going to be 28 sine 58? 28 sine 58, 23.7, I'm going to write to a few extra sig figs, 23.7, what was it, Mr. Dewick? 45. I'll write here 23.7. I'll be fussy. If you didn't put units, I would take a half mark off, because that is an answer. We always put units next to our final answers. Well, if Vy is sine, can you tell me which trig function is Vx? Of course you can. Yes. Lily likes that joke. That's mine. You won't, both of those you won't see in any textbook. I'm particularly proud of the of course you can, because that's such a bad pun. Right up my alley. Yeah. And I can just backspace and edit and save myself some typing. 14.838. 14.838. Here I'll just write 14.8 meters per second. Dumb mistakes. Every year somebody puts Vy for Vx and Vx for Vy. Don't do that. Like, be just cautious. Someone might have done it on this quiz. I don't know, but it happens on the test almost every time. And, oh, I guess I just told you that you'll be asked to find horizontal and vertical components somewhere on your test. But hopefully that was kind of a Captain Obvious. What's the maximum height that the projectile reaches? Okay, I've left room down here. I'm going to do my t-table, I think, right here. X, Y, so I know AX is 0. AY is negative 9.8. VX is 14.838. VY initial is 23.745. Okay, the word height tells me I'm solving this vertically. Problem, I only know 2 things. I need 3 things to find the 4th. What else do I know? What's V? I gotta be fussy. VY final, right? We gotta be very careful with our components. If you tell me that VF is 0, I would mark that wrong. No, it's not. It still has a horizontal component. It's not at rest, stopped, hovering in midair. And that's what technically you're saying when you say that. But definitely VY final at the top is 0. So now I can find D. Some of you chose to find time. I can find D from this. This is plenty because I have VF squared equals VI squared plus 2AD. So VF squared minus VI squared all over 2A will get me straight there. 0 squared minus 23.745 squared all over 2 times negative 9.8. 0 squared minus 23.745 squared divided by 2 times negative 9.8. Y'all get 28.8? Or did I make a typo? I think I'm good. Sorry, 28.8? Is that right? Yep. And if you found time and then used D equals VIT plus a half AT squared, you should get the same answer, or at least within 2 sig figs. Probably the third sig fig should match as well. So 28.8 meters. If you got that, 2 out of 2. Otherwise, I would give you probably a half mark if I saw that you would realize that VY final was 0. I would give you a half mark for that, a half mark for that, and then a half mark for the answer. If you used finding time as your method, I would have still given you a half mark for finding that VY final is 0 because you still need to have that aha moment. I would give you 1 mark for finding time and then a half mark for finding the distance. C, how long is the projectile in the air for? So you have 2 options. If for part B you found the time, you would have to double it. Most common mistake I see for the kids that find time to find the height, they forget to double it to find the range. Because another thing I could ask you is find the range. Finding the range, you have to use the total time. I'm going to find time. V initial was 23.745, and that's VY initial. AY is negative 9.8. You could either let VY final be 0, find time, and double it. But I know that because we're starting on the ground and ending on the ground, what goes up must come. It's going to hit the ground at negative 23.745 meters per second in the vertical direction. And so I can go straight to T equals VF minus VI over A, and I don't have to double my answer. But I'd take either method, it's just fine. So it's going to be negative 23.745 minus 23.745 divided by negative 9.8. And I get, is 4.8. I would take, because I'm right on the rounding up, the 4 becomes a 5. I would take 4.84 or 4.85 or 4.86. In fact, generally, you have to, the first 2 sig figs need to be dead on, and the third sig fig needs to be within 2 in either direction, and then I know you've done it right. So 4.85 seconds. If you got that, 2 out of 2. Otherwise, I would give you a half mark for recognizing that, 1 mark for that, and a half mark for the answer. Before you turn the page, what else could I ask you to find? I could ask you to find the range. That would be fair game. Oh, I could ask you to find the velocity at the top. What's the velocity at the top? Not 0. It's just Vx. The velocity at the top is 14.838 because that's all that's left at that specific moment in time. That's about it. I can't think of anything else I would do with a projectile from the ground at an angle. Could ask you for the vertical displacement, I guess. How high did we start? 0. How high did we end? 0. Technically, what's dy? Technically, 0. Number 3. 2 forces act upon a point Q. Force F1 is 5 newtons due east. Force F2 is I see compass. I got to draw compass rose. Looks like it wants me to add them together. So I have force F1, 5 east, force F2, 12. Does this work out evenly? I think this will. I think this is the 5, 12, 13 Pythagorean triangle, isn't it? Okay. So there's the resultant, and you get a magnitude of exactly 13 newtons when you do the Pythagoras. Theta goes there, color, color, color. opposite adjacent, tan theta equals 12 over 5. You get a theta of 67.4 degrees. North of south, east of west, what of what? I agree. So, for 2 marks, I would give you 1 mark for the magnitude, a half mark for the theta, and a half mark for the what of what. And then for a correctly labeled vector diagram, I would need to see the 5 and the 12. I would need to see arrows on the ends of your lines, and then I would need to see the resultant drawn in like that. That would get you that. So this question is out of 3 marks. 1 for the vector diagram, 2 for the answer. Oh, boy. I should have given you more room. We'll see. I'm going to draw compass rose. They want the ground speed. So the ground speed is the engine speed plus the wind speed. And I think I've done my rant. They're velocities, and it bothers me that industry calls that ground speed. It should be called ground velocity, but industry doesn't call it that, so I'll go with that. I would also have no problem giving you the wind speed and the wind velocity, magnitude and direction, ground velocity, magnitude and direction, and asking you to find engine velocity. You'd have to subtract, and then you'll subtract 2 vectors. Or giving you engine velocity, ground velocity, and saying, hey, tell me the wind. Again, subtract this over to get the v wind by itself, and you'll have to subtract 2 vectors. How do I subtract 2 vectors? I don't add the opposite. This one is yucky, though, because it's a non-right angled triangle. I have the engine speed due east at 220, plus I have a crosswind blowing 30 degrees north of east. North of what? East. North of what? East. North of what? East. I'm going to go east first. North of east, 80, and that angle is 30. One way to do this would be to add these 2 vectors tip to tail, where that's 220, and that's 80. I didn't hear a phone, did I? I hope I didn't hear a phone. Am I hearing? Oh, I'm hearing an iPad. That's a bit more obscure. I'll live with that just this once. That angle is 30 degrees. There's the resultant. This angle is 150 degrees. And you can find the resultant using the cosine law, and then you can find theta using the sine law. And I've actually counted like how much writing you do. It's about 2 lines shorter. And I'm lazy enough and good enough at math. It's what I would do if you allowed me to pick. But I'm recognizing that, especially with COVID, some of you haven't had as much trig practice as normal. If you want me to show you how to do it with the sine law and the cosine law, hit me up during a flex block, and I can absolutely show you how to do it that way. Or if you know how to do it and you're getting the right answer, I would give you full marks, and my little math nerd heart would go pitter-pat. But for now, what I've tried to instill in you is this. I see an angle, everybody, because I can turn that into 1 horizontal and 1 vertical, and I can combine the horizontals and turn it all into a right-angled triangle. So the first thing that I would do is I would change this into, well, a Vx and a Vy. Is this a projectile? My Vy is sine. Doesn't always work for boats crossing rivers and for airplanes in a crosswind. It does here because the theta is in the same location as when we launch a projectile from the ground at an angle, but often it won't be, especially if the river is blowing north-south, or is flowing east, north, south, or if the wind is doing something weird. So we can't memorize that trick here. But I think here it does end up being Vy ends up being 80 sine 30. It ends up being 40 exactly, yes? And Vx ends up being 80 cos 30, which is going to be 69.282. And so what I really have then is this. 220 plus 69.282 plus 40. What I really have, and this is where I didn't leave you enough room, I'm kicking myself, is this. One triangle side that's 289.288, and then one little 40. And now I'll try and draw this a little closer to scale. The resultant is going to be like this. I'm willing to bet, did you get a theta like less than 10? It's going to be a pretty small angle, isn't it? Yeah, just looking at what I've drawn here. So there's theta, and there is the ground velocity. So to find the magnitude of the ground velocity, it's going to be Pythagoras plus 220. There, now I have that on my calculator. Answer button squared plus 40 squared, square root. Magnitude 292, almost bang on. 292 meters per second at, and I think it's going to be opposite, adjacent, color. Tan theta is 40 over 289, Mr. Duick. 289.288. $7.9 degrees, 7.87. I'll go 7.9. 7.9 degrees. North of south, east of west, what of what? North of east. This is a pretty intense question. I'm not going to give you on the written section a non-right angle triangle. It's just too much work. I put one here so that you all got to practice it. I figure you could handle it if you had to, and if we had 2-hour classes and if it was a 2-hour exam and there was time, lots of time, then maybe I would, but I'm not going to do that, okay? For now, though, then 1 mark for the correctly labeled vector diagram. That would be that right there. So I'd be looking for that and that and that and arrows on your lines. And then I would go 1 mark for that, half mark for the theta, half mark for the what of what. But if you got it right, I would start with giving you 3 out of 3, 1 mark for the vector diagram and 2 marks for the question. 7 marks. This is more like what your written questions will be. You'll see how I can give out lots and lots of part marks. And this question has some teeth. I see an angle. I think the first thing that I would do is components. In fact, I would say to myself, you know what, before I even start, Vy is going to be 20 sine 30. I use 30 degrees twice, but I think that ends up being exactly 10 meters per second. Yes? And that's Vy initial. Vx is going to be 20 cos 30. It's going to be 16 point something, I think. 20 cos 30, 17. 17 point. I could round off after the 2. I'll go 17.3205 because that gives me 6 sig figs, which gives me lots of breathing room. 3205. Alrighty. It's a projectile. What's my tool? What's my strategy that I use for a projectile? T-table. So, Clody, I would start out by going like this. Keegan, what are my 2 physics no-brainers that I can write down? AX equals, AY equals. Okay? And I'll drop down Vx, which was 17.3205. And I'll drop down Vy initial, which was 10. Now, what else have they told me? They gave me the height. This here is 36. I would probably draw that in. Why is it wrong to write dy equals 36? It's negative. I'm ending up below from where I started from. Jan, which column do I have 3 things in? The vertical. What am I going to spend most of my time finding, Nick? Time. So I'm going to make a little, I know they said find the range. I can't get there. What I really know is this. To find the range, it's going to be Vxt. I need t. So, Well, it's going to end up being d equals VIT plus a half AT squared. Vertical, vertical, vertical. Again, you can see how tempting it is for kids for V initial to put the 20 in. Isn't that the initial velocity? Not vertically. No, we never use the slanty one. So it's going to end up being negative 36 equals 10t minus 4.9 t squared. I did the half of negative 9.8 in my head. What kind of an equation is this? It's quadratic. How do I know? It's got a squared. By the way, if you are shaky on solving a quadratic by hand and you don't have the solver, there is a workaround. Your other option is you can find Vy final. You can find how hard it's traveling vertically when it hits the ground, and then you can use V final, A, and V initial to find T, and you don't need to do a quadratic. But it means you're finding something in order to find something. So I kind of shy away from that. But if you're really struggling with the quadratic formula, hit me up during a flex and I can show you a method that doesn't require the quadratic formula. Positive 4.9 t squared, take away 10t, take away 36 equals 0. No, I moved this to there. I moved, because I like my quadratic term to be positive. That's when I've made dumb mistakes. When the bottom of that fraction is negative, the number of times I've forgotten to put it in drives me cray. So that was my workaround. It's going to be t equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. In my homework, I might have been tempted to try and start plugging the numbers in right away. Is this a quiz? I wrote up the quadratic formula. It gives me my little cadence. It gives me my rhythm, and I can think about where things are going to go, even though I might be able to skip that step in my homework. I always show extra steps on my quizzes and tests. Negative b, that's going to, square root, Mr. Duke, fraction bar. Negative b, that's going to be positive 10. Plus or minus the square root of, it's going to be negative 10 squared. The negative will vanish, so I'm not going to bother typing it when I go to my calculator. Minus 4 times a times negative 36 all over 9.8. 10 squared. I know it's negative 10 squared. I'm going to skip that. So is this a fraction? Yeah. Brackets around the top at the beginning, and then I also have to have bracket around the square root. So inside the square root is a 10 squared minus 4 times 4.9 times negative 36. Close off the square root, close off the top, divided by 9.8. Those of you with your fancy schmancy solvers, did you get 3.91666422? And since this is not my final answer, I'll carry like 5 sig figs, 3.9166. Not done. They want me to find the range. That's dx. That's going to be vxt. That's going to be, what was vx? 17.3205 times 3.9166. 17.3205 times answer button. By the way, I didn't even bother finding the negative value because I had my positive one, so I saved myself some time. I could have, but... And I got a range of 67.8 meters. Is that correct? People nodding. So if you got 67.8 meters, I would give you 7 out of 7. If you didn't, here's how I would give out part marks. I would give 1 mark if I saw that component, 1 mark if I saw that component. I would give a half mark for AX equals 0, a half mark for AY equals negative 9.8. So 1 mark for what I'm calling physics no-brainers, even though you kind of need to know your stuff there. I would give 1 mark if I saw that. So now we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4. I would give 1 mark for that. Is that right, Mr. Duke? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I saw time correctly, 1 mark for that. That's 6, and 1 mark for the answer. And what that really means, again, Zane, don't leave stuff blank. I think everybody could at least get that mark, even if you're totally having an off day and can't see anything past that. I think almost all of you could get those marks. That would put you at 3 out of 7. You've almost passed the question. Is that a hand-up question? Question? No, you're just doing that? Okay. Whew. Really? Another? Oh! This one's going to be easier. Do you know how I know this one's going to be easier? They gave me horizontal information, which probably means I'm going to find time horizontally. No, quadratic. I'm going to start out fairly similarly. In fact, terribly, I think I used the same diagram, 20 and 30, so the components are going to be exactly the same. Vy is going to be 20 sine 30, which is 10, and Vx is going to be 20 cos 30, which is 17.3205. That's what happens when I reuse a diagram and forget to change the numbers. Again, it's going to be a t-table. X, y. Again, I can say almost put ay there. That would be silly. Ax is 0. AY is negative 9.8. VX is 17.3205. VY initial is 10. But this time, wonderfully, they've told me DX, the range, it's 154. And that is forwards. I don't need to make that negative. That's moving forwards to the right. So, okay, I can find time by using DX equals VXT. What happened to the plus a half AT squared? A is, so time is just going to be DX divided by VX. It's going to be 154 divided by 17.3205. 8.8912. 8.8912 seconds. And I can also walk that here. T equals 8.8912 seconds. Here, I asked you to find the height of the cliff. What else could I find? Well, now that I have 3 things, I could also find Vy final. Not 0, but I could find how fast it was hitting the ground. Oh, and now that I knew Vy final and Vx, I could even find the slanty velocity. I'm not going to ask you that on the written section. That might be good as a multiple choice nasty, though. Anyways, I can find dy. That's going to be equal to Vyt plus a half AY t squared. It's going to be 10 times 8.8912. I'm going to use my answer button. Plus 0.5 times negative 9.8 times 8.8912. Don't forget the squared. I should get a negative answer because I did end up below from where I started. If I don't get a negative answer, I'd be a little bit nervous. 10 times answer button plus 0.5 times negative 9.8 times answer button squared. Get negative 298? It's a high cliff. Technically, it said find the height. Height is a scalar. But if you said negative, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to be that fussy. So if you got that, I would give you 7 out of 7. Otherwise, part marks, again, I would give you 1 mark for Vy, 1 mark for Vx, 1 mark for what I'm calling my physics no-brainers, 1 mark if I saw that, 1 mark for finding time, 1 mark for that, and then 1 mark for the answer. Can you give yourself a score, please, out of 31, please? If you need to lawyer with me, now is the time.